If you think as a requirements engineer and you imagine yourself, you have to start a new job in a large company. So what do you expect? Will you work in a greenfield approach? Is it rather a lean startup and you don't know what it will be in the future? Or do you really know that the solution needs to be maintained and third enhanced for the next 20 years to come? Or will you add or change requirements to a big existing documentations, which probably Nasse-Schneiderman diagrams or use case model and so forth? In the case of number 2 and 3, you have to come up with a strategy and how to incorporate the fact that people working on this solution will change. They may even just be in the kindergarten right now, so you will document for them as well. And will the new feature, which is basically a new alternative flow in a use case, be described as a feature with some stories, and the existing use case will not be touched? Will the new business rules be described as a simple story? What happens to the large, complex business rule document? You need to know how to handle that and what is acceptable, not for you, not only for you, but also for the company in the long run. For these kind of questions, a solution-centric development approach comes into play. In the past, a complete upfront documentation of requirements is neither practical nor enforceable. And what we see here is an overview as a skeleton to build up requirements with a natural evolution. And we see here an analogy in architecture. And this is a possible solution. We start with a useful patchwork documentation based on a skeleton, which can be completed step by step. For example, a first version would just be a small domain model and a use case model. In the next generation, you may add a floor, which represents a use case or a flow in a use case. And if you document like that, then you need some guidelines to build up such an evolutionary and incremental documentation. Some companies, one in the Netherlands, they even decided to not specify acceptance criteria for their stories, but they directly trace from there to the right point into the skeleton. The skeleton must hold all attributes to scale up and support the needed flexibility and support for variations. For that, an agile approach is best to comply with. And one discussion topic that we face sometimes as well is that applications are either already existing, they include a lot of diagrams, structured diagrams, Nasse-Schneiderman diagrams, use case models, and so on, and they have a long expected lifetime. So depending on the attributes of a solution, it might be necessary to extend the definition of done and adapt it to existing documentations. We work a lot with the DoDs, and in such a special case, you would consider features and stories as so-called transient objects or change requests, and use it as a trigger to edit the existing documentation, the permanent solution objects. So we have here stories, and they're just are triggering new additional alternatives flow in a use case or no use cases. And with each new stories, you add new additional behavior and trace back to the triggering story. The flow is based on Agile with the features and stories still, but these are only used as a trigger to update requirements, code, tests, and its documentation. And criteria for a solution-centric approach is to make transparent what the solution must sustain over the long run. The best practices to establish decisions and here we have some typical criteria. This is the expected lifetime, existing solution and documentation, business criticality, intended use internally or externally, safety classification, is it a class A, B, or C in IC 62304, or the security classification is you think about the HIPAA reference model, expected maintenance and complexity of a solution, size, and previously used life cycles. And some best practices here is that you adopt, extend the DoDs, the definition of done, to the existing documentation. You make decision transparent also for the auditors. You define a decision table in order to have consistent decisions and to model the meta model domain, and even for each type of solution. Tailor to the needs of the solution rather than the life cycles, and all on that, don't be dogmatic. We see here an example of real-world example of a work product model which describes the domain and showing the main objects and their relationships. Different process areas have different colors, and for example, pink for requirements engineering. And such a model needs to be in sync with its producing processes and is a visualization of its results. It's a communication media of any subject matter discussion within the domain and beyond. It helps to visualize key information. For example, we see here that there are transient objects, these are the blue ones, or the solution objects, which are the orange ones, if they're mandatory here with the M, or if they're tailorable, yes or no. So this is all kind of information which we had in such a model. And such different behavior can be driven with definitions of done. And I guess that we are all aware of definitions of done for stories. And the definition of done is an agreed list of criteria that will be met for each story. And without that, we don't have a consistent meaning of done, and velocity cannot be estimated. One very interesting point in scaled agility is that we not only talk about the story definition of done, but also on the scaled level as of team, systems, solution, and releases. And here's a representation of SAFe, and we talk about specific DoDs for release as required by the business, solution at least every PI, system increment at least every iteration, and team increment at least every iteration. And of course, we might have even definitions of done for features, capabilities, and epics. In automotive, for example, the V model is the most commonly used approach for engineering. And teams, and especially requirements engineering, are facing milestones, for example, like here, requirements freeze. Now, it's just a reality, and it can't be negotiated. You can't negotiate with Volkswagen. So new kind of approaches needs to be met. And this is something that the skeleton approach works really well. We use iterations, and within them, we reach these milestones as well. So with such many increments, we learn and fail fast, and this is what Agile is all about. So I would like to summarize our lessons learned from several customers, and depending on the characteristics of a solution to be built, you may consider different flavors of documentation and approaches. For example, lifetime, business criticality, existing documentation, size of solution, expected people turnover, and time to market. A set of solution types help, and the decision table helps to select the right Agile requirements engineering approach. You base decisions on given facts and let it determine what kind of requirements documentation is needed. This is a decision table then. Design the solution for small batches, and you should demonstrate compliance and correctness in each iteration and in small iterations. And you should avoid quality depth. You don't build in compliance at the end of development. You do that with each iteration, and just treat audits like normal, as a part of a normal system demo. Continue to teach, train, coach, and we think that Agile quality management systems and reference models are tools and not a burden. So you define clearly which activities occur on which level. So there are some good practices. Define guidance on DoDs. A lot of different behavior can be handled for each endeavor, for each project. And none of these approaches require a big upfront design. You shouldn't document at the end and avoid any technical depth. And as I said, some companies replace the acceptance criteria with pointers to the requirement specification directly. With each system demo, all jobs related to an iteration should be concluded, and you should avoid pausing behavior or replacing good judgment